Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Paula Byrne from Orc HR Solutions, and this is Sherry Metz Johnson, who is our wonderful coach, facilitator, instructional designer. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership in action. This is something we do every Thursday for 15 minutes. We usually present a leadership challenge, talk about what are some of the particular challenges around that leaders or managers may experience. And then we talk a little bit about some actionable tips. Today, we're going to talk about providing clear expectations and feedback. And so one of the things we're going to talk about is, a high performing team doesn't happen just by accident. It does take some intentionality. But it really happens when everybody knows what success looks like. Sometimes leaders assume that the team fully understands. And so I'm so excited to talk to Sherry about this. So, Sherry, what are your initial thoughts around that? And I'm going to share a personal story a little later around this too.
Well, when I was so excited when I saw this topic because we've always known that having a clear goal, having an idea of how you're going to accomplish it is important for each of us, but also a team, a whole organization. But there's never been a more important time for people to be able to have some clarity. There's so much uncertainty, volatility, changing things coming down the pike, uncertainty, shifting priorities, that if there was ever a time where leaders and each individual has to be really clear on what they're doing, it's just going to help. It's the one thing we can do to help us not feel so fatigued and on the verge of burnout and on the verge of just, wanting to say like, oh, well, I'm just going to do whatever. And so that's why I think it's so important is we can talk all day long about how the importance of clear goals. Everybody knows that. But again, why now? Why does it matter so much? What do you think when I say that?
Well, yeah, well, I think you bring up a really good point. And, around the whole clarity, and, this is another complete topic we could talk about.
Hmm.
But we also know that when people don't have clarity, it actually puts their brain in a
Hmm.
reactive state. And it actually puts their brain in a reactive state, kind of almost like a fear, flight, or fight type of stage, right? And
Hmm.
what that causes them is not to even use the best part of their brain in terms of, and so, I know we've heard Brene Brown talk about clear as kind, but clear, by being clear, it really helps people not to be in that reactive state. So that's one of the things that comes to me.
Yep.
Another thought that comes to me is clarity. It's important that different people may require more details to get more clarity. And so one of the things is like I learned this myself. I'm probably a leader that I over delegate and under instruct. In that I don't like to micromanage. I like to give away a lot of responsibilities, but I haven't always been giving people enough clarity around either what my expectations are, because I have a certain assumption. Some people are good with that, but there's other people on your teams who may need a lot more detail, a lot more information. So one of the things is just being aware of, just because my style was like that and I could live with certain ambiguities and not have that clarity, other people can't. And
Hmm.
that was a big lesson for me. It's
And you
huge.
said it like there's this concern that leaders don't want to be a micromanager,
That's
right?
right.
It's like that's the last thing they want to do. So they can go from kind of feeling like they're giving too much direction and yet they don't give enough. But Paul, so that leads to the next question. So how do you know? How do you know what's sort of like the Goldilocks, too little, too much? How do you know what's just right?
Yeah, it's great. Like at a sort of scientific level, we use assessments to kind of assess different people's styles and how people like to communicate. But like a very basic thing is just ask them, when I'm working with you, what level of detail do you need to be clear, right?
Hmm.
And some people can, they'll go and take the hill. They understand what the goal is, right?
Yeah.
And they understand kind of what your expectations are. Other people need, and so just ask them, you know?
Well, ask them and also think about have they done this before? To what level of quality? To what level of that meets your expectations? And remember that some of your high powered, hard charging, high potential employees want to also appear that they have it all going on. And I'll never forget, I had a manager one time and he gave me this assignment. I had no idea where to begin. And he was kind of a very open ended, figure it out, I believe in you. And I found that instead of feeling like he was trusting me, I felt he was hanging me out to dry. And because I wanted to show I could do it, I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to say like, "Hey, could you actually let me know like what do you think my first step should be or what does success look like or how do we even know when we're done?" And and again, so it's leaders need to be able to flex also given a situation and don't assume that because the person might need a little more clarity that it
Yeah.
doesn't mean they're really not committed and trying hard and going to do the very best they can. But, let me put my brain to work by helping me be clear and actually be able to feel confident on what the next action is.
Right. And I think, like, as you sort of said, like, just even having that very simple, it's a, hey, he had a very simple conversation, said, hey, Sherry, do you understand what success looks like in this
Right.
particular thing? Right.
Yeah.
Do you
And hey,
understand what deliverable
you've
is?
never done this before. I don't think you've ever done this before. I believe in you, but what questions do you have? You want to talk about kind of what your next action would be, or you might want to follow up quicker and kind of have a short conversation, but then check in again, especially with everybody who's not seeing, we don't see each other all the time.
Right.
And so what's going to happen when they're alone in their office and they're like, well, now what do I do? How much time might be wasted
Right.
because they just don't know, or they hurry up and do something because they have to do something. And then all of a sudden they're working on the wrong things, but working very hard. And
Yeah.
all that energy needs to be kind of directed in the right way.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, too, that kind of comes up for me, that this needs to be like a continuous dialogue. It's like, sometimes the word setting goals sounds like it's an event, right?
Right.
Right? And
Got
so
that done.
you set goals, and now we're kind of off to the races.
Yeah.
Everybody knows, but we all know that it requires a little course adjustment, some changes, and then things changes out around, and
Right.
goals may have to be reset, and that's kind of where feedback kind
Hmm.
of comes in, you know. And especially if people are going a little off course, how do you steer them back?
And again, I know you and I talked about it. The kind of the virtuous cycle is you're always setting not just goals, but clear expectations. How have priorities changed? What's new? What's new for me? What's new for the organization? What's new for the team? And with that continual feedback and coaching, it's your opportunity to continue to, as you talk about how it's going, connect back to the so what. This is helping us accomplish our goals. This is helping you focus on what you wanted to get better at. But a leader can help give that frame so you're always connecting it back to something that's more meaningful and purposeful. And again, that's another key theme. People are
Yeah,
looking for meaning and
yeah,
contribution. And so again, and then that's how you create personal accountability. You don't have to keep your thumb on everybody. They know what they have to do. And so they can get on with it. And then you're
Well,
allowing them to kind of
what,
have
what do
some
you
good
what do you
agency.
think gets in the way of leaders providing that kind of level of clarity?
Well, I think you said at the beginning, I think we just assume everybody knows, or I don't want to tell people what to do, or I like figuring things out on my own, or honestly, I think sometimes they think they are being clear, but it's not as vague as they might think.
Yeah,
So if I say like, "Hey, we've got to beat XYZ competition," or "We have to get this to market really quick," or "We've got to innovate," those are just kind of words. It's like they stop to think like, "Have I painted a clear picture?" And is it outcome driven or is it more just kind of like the next activity? And so it's really interesting to spend some time thinking about the quality of your goal setting. Are
yeah,
you clear on your outcomes? Have you painted a clear picture? Everybody might have a different understanding. Really talk about it and then talk about it. What are you excited about? What do you think is going to be challenging? How will you know you've done a good job? That whole conversation doesn't have to take that long.
right. It's so funny. I remember doing some work with a CEO and his executive team, and he sort of said, "We just have three goals.
Yeah.
Everybody understands them and stuff like that." And one of the things, then in this exercise, we kind of gave them some visibility to how different people may communicate, the amount of information that different types of people need and stuff like that. And it was so really interesting when he asked people, well, what's not clear about these goals? And somebody said, well, what's not clear about this goal is what's changing and what's staying the same. Or what's not clear about this goals is when exactly are we thinking about achieving this? Or
Right.
what's not clear about these goals are all of these X, Y, Z and stuff like that.
Right.
And he had this engagement and learned that all of these people, even though for him they were crystal clear, right?
And leaders think like, all I do is talk about this. I'm always
Right.
talking about what are the
Exactly.
top three goals.
Exactly what
But
he
yet
said.
then somebody will say like, why does it feel like we don't have priorities? Because everything what are we stopping doing? What are we saying no to?
Yeah.
And that kind of dialogue can really give you some feedback to say, even when you think like I have been really talking about our number 1, 2, and 3 KPIs, it's amazing how people will still be like, well, that doesn't answer my question. And so getting it to not just the big picture, but when leaders kind of think about, well, what does this mean to this team member, to this whole department? And that's where you get that alignment on goals.
Yeah. And so I think, just sort of in summary, I think there were sort of three common challenges. One is around, making sure that people are really clear around expectations. If you give feedback too late or it's too vague, then people are again unclear. And then, as you said, assuming they should just know. But then one last thing, and we did talk about this in our very first session around leadership and action, we won't get into it today, is some people avoid those difficult conversations because they feel uncomfortable. And so I'd refer back to our first session where we talked about what difficult conversations are you avoiding. But let's talk a little bit about, what are some actionable tips that we could give people to take away in terms of, okay, let's look at addressing clarity.
I always say, hey, you want to make your job easier as a leader? Always start with, do we have clear understanding of what success looks like? Are we clear on the goals, the outcomes? And so rather than thinking about it like, oh, I don't want to talk to Paul because he's clearly not getting it, he's going off track, just say, oh, looks like I have to have a conversation about, are we clear on the outcomes? And don't make it such a big deal.
Right.
And then also check your assumptions. Like wouldn't it be easier if they just didn't really understand the goal versus sometimes we assume they're phoning it in, they're quietly quitting, they're burnout, they don't want to do it. And you're like, how do you even know that? Just kind of check that and get curious and say, hey, wanted to talk to you about how this is going, and where we're at, and just make sure we're on the same page and nothing has changed.
Yeah, I think setting that assumptions, because sometimes we will make opinions based on our interpretations, not based on facts.
Which is why we get in trouble we don't want to have a difficult conversation.
Right.
Because no matter how hard you try, it's really hard to make it sound nice to say, you're not cutting it. Right. You're bringing us down. Right. You're the problem. And I'm like, stop trying to make that sound nice. Back it up and go back to what did you observe? Yes. And how does that help them meet their goal or not? And that's what you start with. This is what
I observed, not what I interpreted.
Yeah. And it sounds easy, but it's really hard to do because we jump to, this is my conclusion. This is my judgment, right? My job is to judge, to evaluate. And I'm like, not yet. Go back to what is it you observed?
And then I think the other thing, feedback, sometimes people, like if I say to you, Sherry, I want to give you some feedback. Like the first thing, it's kind of going to put me into a reactive state.
You talked about the fight or flight. I said that the other day. It was like, when I say I want to give you some feedback, it's as my body reacts as if somebody's walking up behind me in the dark of night.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the same
fight, flight,
neurochemical reaction I have in my body because people have been talking about feedback as just an excuse to kind of unload, to give you a bunch of opinions. So you're going to have to practice making your feedback more objective and helpful because you got to pay attention that if people are in that heightened emotional state, they're not even hearing you.
That's right. And make it about growth, not just about correction, Yes. And then I think the last one is reinforce and follow up with next steps to ensure there's an alignment. And there's also accountability. Like, do you understand what are you going to do, take forward, by when, so that there's clarity around, you know?
And
And
you're
so,
focusing on the work. You're not just trying to keep your thumb on people. It's like you're on the same side and you're looking at the work together. And then of course you're going to follow up because that's respectful to see. I just want to make sure that working, that you feel good and that you're able to go full speed ahead and you feel, you don't have a lot of questions that are holding you back.
yeah, so I think sort of, because we're out of time now, just to summarize it, ask yourselves, where are you maybe not providing clear
Hmm.
expectations? And what are some of the things that you can do to kind of realign, make sure? And I think the first thing, and it's the simplest thing, is just ask your people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a conversation.
Yeah.
Build clarity one conversation at a time.
Yeah. So thank you for our leadership in action. And we will be here again next Thursday with another new topic to discuss. And thanks, Sherry. It was great to
Thank
have
you,
you
Paul. Fun
today.
as always.
Yeah.